So I have just come off of a call that I just wanted to share with you. It's a really, really interesting one that just stopped me in my tracks, and I thought, the year of awareness and abundance. I've got to be aware. I've got to listen to this thing. Let me just give you a little bit of background. A person I was just on the call to said, "What are you doing over the weekend? What are you doing tomorrow? What have you got planned?" And I thought, well, okay, I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and I've got a few bits and pieces to do, a little bit of stuff at home, a little bit of kind of social thing. We've got friends coming over for dinner in the evening, and this stuff going on. And then I stopped and thought, how have I prioritized this? How have I actually made those choices as to what is going to happen tomorrow? And it reminded me, and we got into this conversation about kind of how did you choose what you were going to do tomorrow? And we started to explore this, and it reminded me of the pebbles in a bowl philosophy, I guess you could call it. And I wanted to share that with you because it's a really interesting one. If we are being aware and mindful and really conscious of the choices and decisions we're making this year, and of course, the mantra is for 2022 awareness and abundance, we've got to kind of really take notice of how we're making our decisions. What are those kind of choice filters? What are the things that we're doing to make the choices of how we're investing our time, not spending time? Remember, we've talked about that. This is about investing our time, getting a great quality return from this precious resource that we have that's called time. So the question was, what are you doing tomorrow? And using the pebbles in a bowl scenario or philosophy, I thought I need to kind of look at this. If you haven't come across the pebbles in the bowl, the story apparently is, and I don't know who came up with this, but it's a fascinating little insight, was that a professor was standing in front of his class and was doing a lecture, and he put a bowl on the table in front of the class and started to fill it to the top with pebbles, large pebbles, and said to the class, okay, can you tell me, is this bowl full? And of course, they all put their hands up and say, yeah, of course the bowl is full, because it was full of these large pebbles. And he said, no, it's not. And then he started to put some small pebbles into the bowl. And of course, they fell in through the gaps in between the large pebbles. So clearly the bowl wasn't full of the large pebbles. And so now he says, well, look at the bowl now. You've got large pebbles and small pebbles in there taking up those spaces. Is the bowl full? And of course, most of the class are putting their hands up and saying, yeah, it's still full. Look, we can see it's full. And then he brought some sand and he started pouring sand into the bowl. And of course, the sand took up the space between the small pebbles, between the large pebbles. And then he said, is it full? It's clearly full now, isn't it? And pretty much everybody said, yeah, we agree it's full. And then he took a little jug of water and started to pour the water in. And the water filled the little tiny spaces between the grains of sand, between the small pebbles, between the large pebbles. And then he stopped and he said, look, if your life was made up from putting the sand in first, in other words, everything else, all the noise, all the stuff, you wouldn't have room for the big pebbles or the small pebbles or even the sand. Because if you've poured water into this bowl, there is no room for anything else. So it made me think, and that really did make me think when I very first heard that story. Because if you think about what these symbols really mean, maybe the large pebbles are your health and well-being. Maybe the small pebbles are your important relationships. Maybe the sand is your career or your interests outside of work. And maybe the water is everything else. So if you begin by filling your day and deciding what you're going to do tomorrow, or in my case, this coming weekend, by filling my bowl with water, in other words, doing everything else and not leaving space for the more important things, the small pebbles, the large pebbles, but just filling that bowl, filling that time with everything else, maybe the career and the interests, and then avoiding, because there is no more space left, the really important stuff, the small pebbles, the relationships, or the large pebbles, health and well-being, then we've missed the point. We've missed the trick. We've missed the opportunity to invest our time wisely. So I don't think now, having opened this Pandora's box of this pebbles in a bowl trick, which I'm going to call it a trick, I don't think I can ever go back now. I think I've kind of found this little way of maybe just managing all of my time so that I'm investing it in the right things and maybe putting those large pebbles in first. In other words, thinking first for tomorrow and for the coming days, for investing in my health and my well-being. And then maybe then seeing if there's room to put the small pebbles in, the relationships. Because, of course, if I'm not healthy and have good well-being, I'm not contributing well to those relationships. And then, having established the health and well-being and the relationships, maybe there's room for the sand, the career, and the interests. Because there clearly is. The professor put a lot of sand in between the space between the small pebbles and the large pebbles. But if the professor had just filled the bowl with sand, the career and the interests, there's no way that those small pebbles and large pebbles would have room, because the bowl would be full of sand. And of course, if you fill your world with the water, in other words, you fill the bowl to the brim with water before you even start to think about those other two things. And remember, our little analogy here is that the water is a symbol for everything else. And that's basically what most of us do, is we spend most of our time attending to everything else rather than the important stuff. There is no time for that if you do it the wrong way round. So the analogy, the large pebbles, the small pebbles, the sand and the water, equates to the order of play, really, that we should be prioritizing our tomorrows. Health and well-being first, the important relationships, career and interests, and then everything else can follow. So a little idea for you to play with. That's how I'm going to do my weekend coming up. And hopefully that's one that's of interest to you. I'm so grateful to that conversation that I had. It came from nowhere. And this is the whole point about this year: awareness and abundance, getting more of the good stuff by being super aware. So I'm going to sign off now for the weekend and go and do some of the important stuff, the health and well-being and the relationships bit, because to me, that's clearly what this is all about. And that was the big sign for me. So have a little play with the concept of the pebbles in a bowl, and let me know how that goes for you. I've had a lot of feedback from some of the earlier little moments that I've been sharing over the last couple of weeks, and we're now on day 21 of this 365-day journey, and already a lot of people sharing their insights of how some of these little tips and ideas are kind of working for them. So thank you, and keep those coming. Absolutely fascinating to see other people's perspectives on these little ideas. So have a great weekend wherever you are, whatever you're doing. Remember, tend to those big pebbles first. Don't fill your bowl with water. Everything else can wait. Everything else, there's room for it. There's room for that, but attend to the important key stuff first. Have a great weekend, and I'll see you next week.